All right, welcome to this webinar as we recognize October as Cybersecurity Awareness Month. Every Thursday for the 5 Thursdays in October, we are going to be hosting a series, Great Failures in Cybersecurity, led by the good folks at Mainstream Technologies and many of their partners and resources. I'm Roby Brock with Talk Business and Politics, and we are proud to partner with Mainstream Technologies on this vital public service here. We welcome all of you here today and all those who will be watching online after the live performance that we will go through today. Let me introduce our panel to you. We have John Burgess with Mainstream Technologies. He's the co-founder and president. Sara Christie is Mainstream Technologies Cybersecurity Relationship Manager. And Amy Pierce is the founder and president of Bank Strategic Solutions, which you might imagine provides strategic solutions to banks and financial institutions. John, Sara, Amy, thank you all very much for being here today. I'll let you say hi to everybody. So everybody give us a big hello.
Hey y'all,
good morning.
All right. Let's get started by setting the scene for today's discussion. Our subject today centers around a spear phishing attack and how to train your workforce to be aware of these malicious efforts. Let's cue up our story and go to a focus of a real world occurrence here. The names have been changed to protect the innocent, as the old Dragnet series would say. Let's have a listen.
The first episode involves a company with 25 employees and annual revenue of $5 million. The leadership of the company was comfortable communicating by email, and the CEO traveled a lot while the CFO was home-based. They were not frequently in the same location. One day, the CFO receives an email that appears to be from the CEO, who is at a conference or trade show and would be expected to make new contacts or establish relationships. This email from the CEO says he's decided to do a project with a new vendor and needs the CFO to wire $50,000 to this new vendor to get the project started. The CEO states that he will update the CFO when they are together the next time. At the time, the CFO found the request to be out of the ordinary, lacking details, and didn't recall any prior conversations regarding a new project in development. So the CFO responds to the email asking for an update on this development, and the CEO says he's busy at the show, doesn't have time to talk, and he'll update the CFO later. So the CFO proceeds to transfer the money and thinks nothing about it. A few days later, the CFO gets a second request for another $25,000. Because the deal has been established, he goes ahead and makes a second transfer. 2 weeks later, the next time they are together, the CFO asks the CEO about the vendor, and the CEO does not know anything about it, which is when they both discover they have been defrauded. They immediately contact their bank, and unfortunately, because they executed the order to transfer the money without anyone impersonating them, they could not recover the money. How could this happen to the leadership of a successful business? And could it have been avoided?
Good questions. Good questions all the way around there. So let's come to our, I'll give everybody a little bit of a shot on this. Just tell me, how common is something like this? Do you hear about it every day, or do you experience it with any of your clients on a pretty regular basis? John, I'll go to you first.
It's a common attack vector. We call it CEO fraud, where I think, and everybody probably on the call on the webinar today can attest to receiving an email at some point from the leadership of their company asking them to go buy a gift card, or I'm out of town and I broke my leg and I need you to wire money to the Mexican hospital I'm in. There's, these are all social engineering attacks that are designed to instill a sense of urgency by impersonating, someone who's in a position of leadership, and and crafting a scenario that's at least somewhat believable sometimes.
Sara, do you hear things like this on a regular basis? Does it seem to be something outside of the sphere of your clients so that you're warning them about it, or have you had some clients that have actually experienced this?
We have. We like to think that our clients are a little bit more educated than other folks, but it is a pretty prevalent occurrence. And I would say, as far as hearing about it goes, sometimes you don't hear about it as often as it happens because people don't tend to advertise if they've fallen victim to these sorts of compromises.
Yeah.
It's not something they want to share.
Sure. Amy, how about you? You obviously deal with a lot of banks and kind of come at it from that banking perspective there in terms of there wasn't a whole lot that this company could do because the people that perpetrated this on them pretty much followed the proper protocol to get the money out of the bank.
That is exactly true. You know, this does happen daily. Banks get phone calls pretty much daily with either a business that's been a victim of an attack or a person that's been a victim of an attack. And they did follow the proper protocol at the bank, so that does make it more challenging from this perspective.
Let's, I want to get everybody's take on this as well too. Let's identify the vulnerabilities in this case. And John, I'll let you lead again on this one as well. Just how does the lack of proper protocol make this company particularly vulnerable? Kind of walk through what they did not do as well as they could have.
Well, I guess first off, how the attack happened is this is a well-planned and executed, like you said, spear phishing attack, where the attackers identified a specific company as a target, and then they crafted their attack to make it as appealing or as believable as possible for the con to happen. You know, the first step is they researched the target. They understood who the players were. They'd gone and researched their LinkedIn page. You know, maybe knew who the CEO was, knew who the CFO was, understood that the CEO traveled a lot. You know, maybe the CEO posts in social media that he's at a trade show or at a conference. So if the attackers if they're skilled in doing this kind of attack, they research your social digital breadcrumbs to understand your company. Then they just waited for the opportunity. They did a couple other setups to set the trap. They created what we call a homonymic spoof domain name, where they created a domain name that was visually similar to the target's name. The target's name had the letter M in the name, and the attackers created another domain that replaced the M with an R and an N. So obviously nothing illegal about it. They created a valid domain that just visually resembled, at first glance, looking at a small font on an email, your eye might not catch the fact that it's an R and an N and not an M. And then lastly, obviously in some previous compromise, they had secured the ability to access a bank account in the United States. So, they knew when to expect the funds. This was not their bank account, but they had somehow gotten access to it before. So there was quite a bit of planning that went into this attack. And then it relied on the lack of protocols that the target had for the attack to work.
Amy, let me come to you with just a follow-up on this. So what would the banks have advised this client to do to prevent something like this from happening?
Just like at the bank, and where we have the two-step authentication, and the banks are recommended to automatically make a phone call back. If the CFO had the ability to had verified a different way if the CFO had verified a different way with the CEO, there could have been a stop in that method. That two-step, some other form of authentication should be something that happens in the businesses just like it does in the banks, just to give them another step. If it had been an international wire directly instead of, as John mentioned, going to a local account and then going out, there would have been another step of verification for the bank as well.
So Sarah, do you use something like this as an example to your clients in terms of why they need to do some of the things? Do you find that they don't understand why they need all these extra steps? I can tell you as a business owner, I'd be really frustrated to have to go through 14 hoops to make a bank transaction. That would, as a matter of fact, I even get a little angry when my fingerprint ID on my computer says you got to put the password back in. I'm like, I don't remember the password. That's why I had a fingerprint ID to begin with. But talk to me about the frustration that may come from somebody that doesn't want to jump through all the security hoops.
So that's one of the things that we find ourselves bumping up against a lot is nobody wants to be inconvenienced. And it's 2020. We are able to do more things quickly than ever before. You can manage all of your finances in just a couple of clicks, and nobody wants that extra little bit. We just don't have the patience for it anymore. But when we change our attitudes and our outlook on security and welcome a two-factor, Amy talked about multi-factor authentication. That's one of the easiest, safest ways to eliminate some of these compromises. And I think we're all like this, in this particular case, if the CFO had made a phone call or a text to the CEO that says, hey, I got this email, I wasn't expecting it, I just want to make sure that we're on the same page, that would have stopped it right there. And it would have taken, 15 seconds. So we just have to kind of accept that in order to protect ourselves, we have to do just a couple of extra steps. It's a very small time investment, but this company could have saved themselves tens of thousands of dollars with a text message. So
don't tell my kids that. They'll have an excuse to text message more and more. So, Amy, what kind of protections or insurance options would be out there for companies that find themselves either in a situation like this or want to, I guess, have an additional layer of protection against something like this?
There are types of cyber insurance. There are opportunities for business owners to have cyber insurance, just as the banks really today have cyber insurance. It does matter what is in the policy and being thorough with the policy to make sure that wire transfers and protocols that they put in place are followed to have that insurance pay if there is an event. But cyber insurance is really a key factor for businesses as well as banks today.
And this is different than, say, a personal fraud situation that a bank would normally encounter where somebody maybe gets a credit card or something like that. This is a whole different level, correct?
It is a whole different level. Definitely.
John, let's come back to you. You know a little bit more about this case, even though we're protecting the names to keep them innocent there. Like they said, do we know who the bad actors were in this case? Who do we find out that was behind all of this?
Well, this was, this attack was a product of what we, and you hate to, sometimes this gets to the connotation of being the boogeyman that we're talking about, but literally there is a global cybercrime network, and in the forensics behind this attack, that first email came from somewhere in Nigeria. That was where the email originated from. The fake domain that they had created to send the emails from, that resembled the target's domain name, was registered using phony credentials somewhere in Eastern Europe. And then obviously there was someone who had co-opted the credentials for a bank account in the United States. So, it's you talk about, you don't want to understand why this, small, pretty average company was targeted. They're obviously not the first company to be targeted this way. Maybe a list of attendees had been stolen earlier from this conference or a previous conference. Maybe the CEO's posting on his social media, attracted their attention. Maybe the CFO had interacted with a previous phishing email that got him on their radar as someone who might be susceptible to that kind of attack. The point is, these people are running a numbers game. And, if you look at this simple attack, yes, this is a small company. The odds of success for this kind of attack are very low. But if they do this enough times and they get $50,000 a pop when it does succeed, you can see that, it might be kind of lucrative for them to keep doing this. So it's important to know that, this company probably wasn't the target at the start of how this whole process, but they became a target by some other event, and possibly by their behavior before this and during this event. So it's, we preach this all the time, that they are out there. They're not necessarily looking for you, but if you raise your hand through the way you act or your lack of preparedness or security, you're going to get on their radar.
It's probably too a little bit like a cupcake football schedule as well too. The bad actors practice on a smaller company or more vulnerable company before they go after somebody bigger, because they figure out what works and what doesn't work. Is that a pretty fair comparison there, Sarah?
That would, John, I think you would be best to speak to that.
Yeah, John.
Well, it works both ways. They practice on the smaller companies, but they're also able to bring some very sophisticated tools to these attacks that they develop, because that's what they have to use to get into the larger companies. So they're taking, like I said, it's a global economy, and they share information, they share tactics, they share technology, and tools that work in one case, they rapidly sell to each other and are able to deploy them on other attacks. So it might be something that they learned hacking a very large public company, that then they're able to, it's child's play for them to break into a small businesses network because of the tools that they're able to bring to the fight.
So if they're the bad actors in part of this global network, who's the global police? Who's out there trying to crack this ring? Who's out there following the forensics of everything that goes through?
There are all the governments in the world, cooperate on this endeavor. In the United States, it's the FBI are the primary law enforcement agency that tasked with cybercrime. Obviously when these companies these attackers are working multinationally, it takes a level of cooperation between governments to be able to bring some of these people to bear sometimes. So typically it's the national law enforcement agencies, and there are a number of private companies that help with this endeavor, doing threat intelligence, developing products, anti-spam, anti-malware type things. So there's on the good guy side, it's the national governments and a collection of industry partners, very much a private-public partnership.
Who can speak to me? And Amy, I'd love to come to you first on this one here. How expensive is it to recover from something like this? I mean, talk to me about the forensics that are involved, the discovery that's involved. That's got to have a huge price tag for a company that gets compromised like this.
Yeah, first they may lose, like John said, 50,000 or more per attack, but then the forensic accounting could be another 50 to 100,000. The time and loss from just daily activities is thousands of dollars as well. This could be well into the hundreds of thousands of dollars from one attack.
For just a small company like that. And so, Sarah, when you go back to perhaps a client, or you get a new client that has been compromised and they've come to you for that very purpose, is like, hey, we didn't have the protections in place. Kind of walk me through how you start to build, I guess, that campaign for them to say, we're going to do some things differently around here, and here we go. Tell me how that conversation goes.
Usually that's a conversation that for us is nice, because we don't have to demonstrate what's on the line, because they're acutely aware of what's on the line. They've already felt that pain. So then we just work on the basics first and seeing what security basics they have. You've got your, and John, jump in here, because sometimes I miss some of the basic ones. You've got your spam, you've got your firewalls and that sort of thing. But one of the things we start with, especially on compromises like this, is workforce awareness training, because that's the first place that you can protect yourself, is through your people. If you educate them on what to look for and how to avoid being targets and victims, not taking bad actions, not clicking on suspicious links, looking over an email to see what stands out as something to avoid. That's kind of the first place we start before kind of anything else. It's the easiest, most effective thing to protect yourself, I think. John, would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. A culture, like Sarah mentioned earlier, a culture of security where, everybody from the top down understands that we are at risk here, and that employee, literally becomes the last line of defense in stopping this kind of attack. This company had an anti-spam solution in place, but the attackers are constantly adapting their tools and their methods to get around our protections. The anti-spam tool didn't catch this because this was not a spam email. It was directed to a single individual. It came from a legitimate domain, and it wasn't trying to digitally impersonate the sender. It was first.last@fakedomain.com, and it just happened to look like first.last@realdomain.com. So there was no digital subterfuge going on. This was a low-tech sleight of hand attack. So the very sophisticated tools that they had in place didn't stop this. So it ended up getting to that last line of defense, which, like Sarah mentioned, that's literally the cheapest and the most effective thing you can do is just educate your people on how to recognize these things. And when that spidey sense starts tingling, here are the checklist of things to verify whether or not this is a legitimate email or not.
Yeah. So Sarah, I would think too, this would, as a business owner, I would be thinking this is going to take weeks and months of training and workforce training, and it's probably not that complicated to get this done. So maybe allay some concerns or fears that this is going to be so time consuming that we can't focus on our regular line of business.
So I think part of it is don't panic. This is a concern that everyone should be on their radar, but it's not something you should panic about. But you should, as from top down, leadership down, talk about what role security is going to play in your business going forward and how to implement that. So a lot of it is just getting your people on board, opening that conversation, making it something that comes up a lot. That way people, when they have questions, they don't mind raising their hands and asking. And people want to help. They want to be helpful. They want to keep things safe. And so you start out with some training, and it's not a huge time investment, and it's certainly not a large cost investment. The initial training in a lot of places is 15 minutes per person. And it's just introducing the idea to people and getting them kind of thinking on that path, and then just following it up, little touches every once a month or something, like, hey, this is a new thing we've seen. People want to know about this sort of thing. They are interested in becoming educated because they apply it to their personal lives as well. So it's a really easy place to start for folks.
All right, Amy, I give you the last word on this.
I think the same protocols that work in the bank with a two-touch verification, following up on what Sarah said, those are just key parts. If it was a personal phishing attack, it would have been a little bit different from the bank's perspective. They probably would have worked with them to try to get the money back, or what typically happens is the bank actually compensates the person for it if they didn't verify. So this is a little different, but verification and those extra security steps are really the key to success in preventing cyber attacks.
All right, that is going to wrap this conversation up. I want to thank John and Sarah from Mainstream Technologies for all that great insight. Amy, thank you as well from Bank Strategic Solutions. We're going to do this every Thursday during the month of October. Next week, we're going to be looking at ransomware, proper configuration, some strong password policies there. And in true cliffhanger fashion, I'm going to leave everybody watching this wanting more a little bit here. Next week, a large U.S. company is held hostage by cyber criminals on a Saturday night with only 24 hours to meet the ransom demand and difficulties accessing their backup data. Can this company beat the clock? Tune in next week to find out. Thanks, everybody, for watching. We will see you next time.